So, hello, everybody out there. Welcome to the Crypto Science Society podcast, the speculum of truth and a little bit of paranormal lens polish for your ears. I'm Jason Cordova, and with me is the Mirror Universe version of Janae Conrad. Say hello.
Hello. Bitchy, right?
What?
That means I need to be bitchy, right?
You can interpret that however you want.
Okay.
But for a Terran, I would expect you to be a little more forward than our universe Janae is. Yeah.
Okay.
Also joining us as a powerful force projection is Crypto Jim Brown. Hi, Jim.
Hi.
You know, even though Crypto Jim. Yeah.
They both begin with a K, so don't worry about it.
You know, you're even though you discount your own knowledge and expertise as a cryptozoology expert, don't sell yourself short, because you've been out in the field. You've done it. You've done some research. You've gone to conferences. You walk the walk, not just talk the talk.
I appreciate that. I mean, you know what the definition of an expert is, don't you?
What's that?
No.
You know what an expert is?
What?
An X is a big nothing, and a spurt is a little drip under pressure. So.
Well, I guess that suits it. Well, together we are your guides to the archives of the Crypto Science Society, an organization dedicated to the study of strange and unusual phenomenon. And on today's show, if you couldn't tell, we're going to be discussing the topic of Thunderbirds. So the idea of monstrous-sized birds in legend, folklore throughout the world, and maybe documentation as actual cryptids. So what all do you know about these crazy beasts?
Well, not much. As we're kind of like talking before, I think in terms of the specifically mentioned Thunderbirds of North America, I know a little bit, but it's really, there are a lot of different large birds in a lot of different stories around the world that pop up.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, I mean, even just sort of the one I think that we all sort of, a lot of people, I guess, can probably relate to, or not relate to, but know the most is probably like the concept of a phoenix and rat bird.
I'd also say the rock, probably a pretty well-known.
Yes.
From the Odyssey.
Yeah.
Now, Jim, these are basically Bigfoot with wings.
Oh, okay. All right.
So that you feel at home, to make sure you feel at home. We also came across some news, actual Sasquatch Yeti news going on. Do you want to mention that briefly?
Well, all I know is, this is literally all I know is that an Indian, as in a team from India, mountaineering team, came across some large tracks. And I had to read the article twice. There was some kind of a reprint of the original, Eric Shipton incident way back in the 50s, with some of the early reconnaissances on Everest. Well, because the picture that I saw actually looked remarkably similar. But that literally is all I know, is that this team from India found some strange tracks up, in the snow.
Mm-hmm. And this is the Indian Army, right?
Yeah, that's just Indian Army. Yes.
Not just some random group of people out there in the mountains. These are trained observers, and this is an official press release from a government agency saying that they
could try to follow those tracks and see where they go.
Yeah.
Using a drone or something.
Yeah, but unfortunately, there's not a whole lot more going on about that. Just that that's kind of a nice little official thing to bring things together. And I'm sorry, this is only our second cryptid episode, and I missed the first one. You guys held it down.
Nice. We're all pros.
Yeah.
No.
So,
But
so like I said, like I said before, Thunderbirds kind of they're giants with wings. So, um,
regardless of
so
how you cut it, if it's a Bigfoot with wings or if it really is a bird with a 25-foot wingspan, I just don't want to park my car under him. Is my main.
yeah. Oh. Well, according to the um, Encyclopedia Britannica Online, a thunderbird is, in North American Indian mythology, a powerful spirit in the form of a bird. By its work, the earth was watered and vegetation grew. Lightning was believed to flash from its beak, and the beating of its wings was thought to represent the rolling of thunder. It was portrayed with an extra head on its abdomen.
Interesting. So kind of like a lot of the, kind of like a chimera.
Mhm.
Or not a chimera, not a chimera. What's the other thing?
Is he in hybrid or something?
No, I was thinking of a manticore. Like the manticore, sorry, it doesn't have like an image on their belly, but they do have like a human head, and then I think its tail might. Let me look it up real quick.
You know, the the only thing I've seen really is like most people, I've seen it in Indian folk art, images,
Right.
whether blankets or totem poles or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
And up until now, it had never even occurred to me that it was something that people were actually seeing or still seeing. So I'm, like I say, I've been very hurriedly trying to read through everything I can find about it.
Well, as in with a lot of kind of myth and legend and actual cryptid type being kind of thing, very similar to the Sasquatch thing when you come to at least with Native American folklore, in that sense of like, yeah, this is a real thing. Like, we're not just making this up. Like, this is part of our world, part of our life, part of our worldview. And it's only in the Western world that we all think things are not real when they are.
And as I used to always try to, tell my sons when they were younger, mythology doesn't mean it's not true.
Uh-huh.
Right. I heard the expression, I don't know if I know this to be true, but I don't know if it actually happened this way or something like that.
Yeah.
So there certainly is or are layers and layers of truth there.
Mm-hmm.
You just need to peel them back.
Mm-hmm. And so the contemporary cryptozoological usage of the term has deviated significantly from this image, though, shedding most, if not all, of the mythological and spiritual trappings of supernatural powers in favor of a more materialistic phenomenon. To the typical cryptozoologist, a thunderbird is a cryptid, a biological organism, whether extinct or new, thought to exist, but which remains unconfirmed by the scientific community, and in this case is believed to be a large predatory bird, larger and perhaps stronger than known species indigenous to North American continents. Modern sightings and eyewitness accounts of thunderbirds usually liken their morphology to that of an eagle, hawk, or condor, though a minority of them claims instead a more reptilian appearance, which would suggest perhaps a kind of a relic or a pterosaur.
Well, I was just going to say that I've read some of the accounts mention a beak with teeth, and that sort of put the whole different spin on it. If I can tell you a story, actually, to go with that, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go for it.
So I've got this friend, and this gentleman was in Vietnam, and he was a long-range reconnaissance patrol guy. And so these guys were the toughest of the tough. I mean, they were crazy. And they were way up in Laos or Cambodia, one of those places where Americans never went. And he told me this story. He said there were trees up there that had thorns about a foot long that were just needle sharp, that could just go right through you. But what was really terrifying, he said, they and the whole patrol saw this. He said it was a large bird, about a 6-8 foot wingspan, with a huge beak. It had no feathers and had teeth. And I said, you know what you're saying, don't you? And he says, yeah, Jim. He says, yeah, I know what I'm saying. I know exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And interestingly, this gentleman is Native American, too. I just, that just scares the hell out of me. He said it scared the hell out of all of us, too.
Yeah. I hadn't heard, again, it keeps coming up all over the world, and this kind of similar description tends to be pretty a common thread throughout. Now, most modern reports of thunderbirds arise from various locations in North America, with a large occurrence from Pennsylvania to the central states. Mark A. Hall, one of the foremost investigators of the Thunderbird story, gives the following description of the avian cryptid drawn from numerous sightings. Quote, "The bird is distinguished by its size and lifting capabilities exceeding those of any known bird living today anywhere in the world. Wingspan estimates are necessarily all guesswork, but observations sometimes have had the benefit of a measurable object for comparison, or the benefit of time to observe a resting bird. The results most often provide sizes of 15 to 20 feet. The bird at rest or on the ground appears to be 4 to 8 feet tall, typically by the coloring of the bird's overall is dark."
That's scary.
Yeah. Yeah. Remarkably, a bird of 15 feet in size would be the largest bird known in the world today. The largest wingspan known of a living bird is that of a wandering albatross, Demodia exalenus, with a wingspan of 12 feet. And while not a predatory bird, it still boasts an impressive span. The Andean condor, Vulture gryphus, and the Californian condor, Gemoiphis californiensis, are among the largest predatory birds in the world, with the Andean condor reaching a wingspan of 10.5 feet and the California condor, the largest North American predatory bird, reaches a wingspan of up to 10 feet. These are all truly marvelous birds and respectable in their majesty.
Oh my God, yeah. I would love to see
Well,
one.
they're gorgeous.
Have you seen one?
I haven't seen them in real life, but
Yes, certainly.
like the California condor, especially if you're, and I can see why a lot of people would draw a lot of comparisons to it if it's usually black and dark and stuff, and just like its wingspan is massive, and I would definitely confuse that for being something a lot larger than what it actually is.
In one of the articles I was reading, they talked about an experiment actually where they put they made a big kite just with a silhouette.
Yeah.
Yeah, you read, and I can't remember how big.
Yeah, we get to that. We'll talk about that later on.
Oh, okay.
So considering that the Thunderbird reputedly is capable of lifting a deer or a person from the ground, the current predatory birds are not equipped with grasping feet that are strong enough to hold much weight, maybe outside of an owl. Instead, they live primarily as carrion eaters and are only seldom predatory, and then usually on smaller animals. So that's referring to the condors. Condors are scavengers, or like your eagles, owls.
So do I understand you that they eat luggage? Carry on?
Yeah.
Just want to make sure that I was with you on that. So, okay.
As long as it fits in the overhead. Reports of the Thunderbird, however, describe lifting deer and humans off the ground. The Thunderbird is an entity of no small prominence within the mythos of many indigenous North American tribes, particularly those of the Great Plains, Pacific Northwest Coast, and American Southwest. Artifacts depicting them have been discovered at least as early as the Mississippian religious and cultural period of American prehistory, roughly about 900 to 1600 Christian era, in a region known as the Southeastern Ceremonial Complex.
Isn't it Common Era?
Common Era?
Yeah,
it's the Common Era. You're right. It is the Common Era. But isn't it crazy how much Christianity dominates everything in our lives?
Anyway, we started on that.
So this is basically the Mississippi and Ohio River valleys. Thunderbirds were believed to be powerful inhabitants of the realm of order and stability, the upper of three tiers into which the Mississippian cosmology was derived.
You know, it makes me think of, I read this really interesting book, and it'd be something to talk about, I think, further in depth, but it was called The Neolithic Mind, and it was talking at mythology from a neurological perspective, and how our, even though, like, the Neolithic was, like, thousands of years ago, in terms of our, like, evolution, we really haven't necessarily evolved significantly past where our minds were, and they've done a lot of, like, it talks about a lot of these interesting experiments and talking about, like, ecstatic states or altered states of consciousness and how there's a lot of similarities. And so kind of explaining why there's certain imagery all around the world that connects, like swirls, things that look like waves. But the other thing they talked about too, which is why I'm bringing this up, is the idea of, like, how cosmologies are created. And there is, like, this really interesting, I think,
Hello?
of this idea of, like, there's something below and above and, like, in the middle. So there's, like, this three-tiered cosmology that exists, like, all over the world. And how this book kind of really explored, from, like, a neurological perspective, how we kind of create those tiered cosmologies. And so it's just, so it strikes me really interestingly, the book talked about, like, different animals and how animals play a really big role, and how, like, birds is a common theme in these cosmologies, and usually are, like, the more upper tiered parts of the cosmology. So anyway, it's really fascinating book, but I thought it was, like, a really interesting lens in which to look through it, and kind of, like, exploring some of the commonalities we have as a species.
Definitely a tapping into that collective unconscious thing. Yeah, the hardware has not changed a whole lot over many thousands of years. We're still running the same operating system.
Yeah, and just sort of kind of like that. It's interesting how, and then, like, the rituals we build around it, like birds being sacred, or, you know, the idea of metamorphosis and, you know, like, animal sort of shape-shifting. So it's kind of interesting.
I was just trying to look up, and you might have a better memory than I do. In Black Elk Speaks, you know, he has these magnificent visions, and I seem to recall there being, you know, thunder, and, you know, I mean, there's all of these heavenly beings and stuff like this. And I was trying to see if I could find any mention of the Thunderbird or anything similar to a Thunderbird in his visions.
As far as I remember, his vision was very specifically an eagle. And it's very the symbology and the imagery behind that was very specifically intended to be an eagle, because it's the highest of for the Lakota, the eagle is, you know, this is one of the beings, it's sacred being, because it flies closer to the sun than any other being. And so that's kind of our connection, as human creatures, the spirit of that eagle is a way to connect with the creator and the heavens. So
hence the value of the eagle feather, so for say.
Yeah, right. So basically, he was, in his vision, he was exemplifying that he was receiving a message directly from the spirits and the creator.
Okay, all right. I remembered a bird.
Yeah.
Be very prosaic about this. Yes.
Now, to the Comanche, though, there is more about the Thunderbirds, and they are described. They often appear, and this is what we get the specific, like, the Thunderbird mythos, is that they often appeared as a great bird, somewhat like an eagle, but much larger. The Thunderbird made the thunder and lightning and storm and rain. It was dark blue, or showing the color of the cut lead through a thundercloud, with red zigzag markings extending from its heart to the tail, and wingtips. It went south at the approach of winter and returned from the warm country with the sun, bringing the heat and the rain. In its talons, the bird carried arrows with which to strike its enemies. Therefore, the Indians believed that the eagle on our coins is a thunderbird. Its shadow was the thundercloud. It produced lightning by rapidly opening and closing its wings and flashing its eyes. Thunder was the sound made by flapping of its enormous wings, and the downpour with which followed was from the lake carried on its back. And that is actually out of a book called The Comanches, Lords of the South Plains. So that's the legend that, like, I grew up hearing. That's what I knew a thunderbird to be. Like, this is a spirit being that literally brings the thunder and lightning with it.
That's a wonderful imagery. I love that.
Both the Micmac and the Passamaquoddy nations of the northeastern Atlantic coast tell stories of a type of thunderbird which beat its wings to produce powerful wind to agitate the sea so as to dissipate the slime that accumulated when it was stagnant. The Passamaquoddy, who believe strongly in magic, even tell of a small village of shape-shifting thunderbird people far to the north beyond the mystical mountains, which drew apart, back and forth, then closed together very quickly, squashing those attempting passage who weren't agile enough.
For some reason, I'm like thinking of Pete's dragon, and I don't know why.
Oh, yeah.
So it's just kind of interesting why my brain's making that connection for whatever reason.
Well, and Lakota have their own dragon. They call it Cochecula. That's a whole other thing. Now, the Winnebago, or the Ho-Chunk, tell a story of an orphaned boy being kidnapped by malevolent thunderbirds and held captive in their mountain home of the Thunder Spirits, where they planned to devour him. He was saved from that grisly fate by a pigeon hawk, whom he had befriended in his youth. Numerous First Nations, from Lakota and Ojibwe and more, tell of unique and often exciting tales about this majestic spirit. Regardless of the geography and culture, however, whether a singular entity or a species, the creature is consistently portrayed as a massive predatory bird which commanded weather and expressed a similar temperament, cunning, and power it was not to be trifled with.
Huh. This may be, far afield, but when you mention a land that, pulls apart and back together, couldn't help but think of, what was it in the Odyssey again? Not Scylla and Charybdis. Where you had sail the ship, between the
straits.
Cliffs that would open and close.
Yeah. Well, and that brings us out to the other part of the world. Legends of giant birds are not restricted solely to North America, of course. In ancient Mesopotamia, for example, there is an Akkadian myth which tells of Anzu, a lesser divinity with the body of a giant bird and the head of a lion, who is so large that its wings flaps cause storms and whirlwinds.
And in case y'all hear anything that sounds like somebody being slaughtered in the background, my little granddaughter's with us, and she's teething.
Awesome.
Oh, man.
She is...
we got our own Thunderbird in the back.
Yeah. In case y'all hear that, that's what's going on. We're not really murdering anybody. But...
So in Mesopotamia, the Akkadian myth of Anzu talks about a giant bird with the head of a lion that is so large that its wing flaps cause storms and whirlwinds. In the story of the 1001 Nights of Scheherazade, talks of the roc, which is a ridiculously sized bird that can pick up sailors, snatch elephants, or carry bundles large enough to drop on and sink the ships of certain Arabian heroes.
So do the South Americans, do they have a myth like this? Considering they already have, an actual, non-crypto creature,
Mhm.
do they have a Thunderbird myth too, or Thunderbird-like myth?
I don't recall if, say, like
Quetzalcoatl
the
be,
nope,
you know.
nope. That's a winged serpent or a feathered serpent,
Oh,
literally. So
okay, yeah, that's different.
Yeah.
You know, like you had mentioned lion and an eagle. But one thing that's really fascinating is that why always a lion and like an eagle bird, you know? Like there seems to be this really interesting sort of emphasis on those like two creatures. And sometimes sometimes they like squish them together. It's like a one creature thing.
a lion and an eagle.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'd even think about the uh, Ezekiel's vision.
I was just going to go there. Yeah.
Yeah, the angels with the head of a lion, like four faces, right? One of a
Yeah.
human, or one of a lion, one of a bull, and one of an eagle.
And interesting enough, those each of those symbols, became associated with the different gospel writers, and I forget who is who and who got who, but the
Well,
eagle.
and those specific animals were chosen because of their significance in ancient Judaism, right? They're
Probably so, yeah. And
yeah.
of course, just incidentally, we're just kind of touching, on the whole Ezekiel UFO thing too.
Oh yeah,
that
that's
vision is
cool.
all part of that, the wheel and the wheel.
And yeah, not to go too far off track, but there's a lot more. Uh, I, there's a lot more paranormal stuff in the Bible. Every time I go back and reread it, I find more. It's kind of fun. Which should be no surprise to anyone.
Actually, yeah, that's sort of the whole point of it.
Yeah. It is, if nothing else, an attempt to understand that which we don't understand. That's what we don't know. But let's see. Other big birds around the world. The Venetian explorer Marco Polo reported that they encountered stories about rocks in Madagascar. Apparently, the great Kublai Khan received a gift from a gift of a rock feather from Madagascarian envoys, which allegedly turned out to be a frond, which is a leaf or a leaf-like part of a palm fern, from a plant called a raffia palm.
Well, I don't. Maybe they just took it out of politeness. I would hope to think they weren't really taken in by a palm leaf.
Yeah, you would think that they would know the difference.
Yeah, like,
right?
Okay, well, thank you, since you have the big curvedy sword and I don't.
Or the fact like, no, this is really the feather of a rock, which would be really interesting to find out where that ended up, and because that expedition is pretty well documented.
So I'm going to just interrupt here for a second. As we're talking, I'm kind of perusing, and I just found some fascinating pictures on YouTube, a thing called Thunderbirds sightings. Do these mythical creatures exist? I've got the sound turned down so that it doesn't interfere with us, but there are some pretty dang crazy pictures in there and on that video. So just to pass that on.
Yeah. And I do think we will get to some of the more modern sightings too. But supposedly the Islamic tales of the rock may have derived from the story of a creature called the Garunda, which is a Hindu story, which Janae was just talking about. Mm-hmm. These have been told for thousands of years. Mm-hmm. And this is like a solar bird, which is known to carry off giant snakes and elephants. and characteristics that are sometimes attributed to the rock as well. But again, another link between these giant bird myths. So modern sightings, do you have any specifics, Jim, that you were that really stand out for you?
Well, golly, I think if you looked on YouTube, you might find something. The strange winged monster found and discovered in the Huaracha. I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's here in the United States. But a winged monster resembling a huge alligator with an extremely elongated tail and immense wings was found on the desert between the Whetstone and Huaracha Mountains last Sunday. It's just a picture of an old newspaper clip. And then
How's it spelled? How's it spelled?
H-U-A, let me find, H-U-A-C-H.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah. So, and then the next picture shows some turn of the, 1800s sorts of guys holding up a great big old huge bird.
So that actually is a story of it's probably the story of the cowboys who were said
these look like cowboys, and the next picture looks like lumberjacks.
Right. So so there's a story about in 1800s, some cowboys in Arizona were said to have shot and killed a large avian creature, which some people say was a bird. Some think it described it as a featherless reptilian kind of thing. And they hauled the carcass back to the nearest town, and they said they pinned it up or lashed it to the barn and took pictures of it.
In this one, they're holding it up, and in the next picture of lumberjacks, and it's lashed up to the side of a barn.
Right. So then this story ran in the Tombstone Epitaph in 1886. And the paper, they've tried to secure it in the archives, and the paper itself doesn't actually have the picture in it. It has a story about a 16-foot bird found in the desert by some ranchers, but the photograph has never turned up, the actual photograph. So in 1963, article was published in Saga magazine by a guy named Jack Pearl about this situation. So that's the first time this story really comes up. Now, there's been a bunch of people who have recreated it, basically staged the photo, claiming it to be the original one. But the real photo that is said to have existed never has actually turned up.
Dun, dun, dun.
And then the very last one, there's a picture of, I would say, Civil War era folks, and they're standing on a bird that's lying on the ground that seems to be about, I'd say a good 12, 15 feet. So, I don't know.
Now,
I don't know what to make of it, but there it is.
That said, so there's been a lot of people that claim to have seen the photograph, though, and held it. Ivan T. Sanderson, he was like the Jack Hanna of his day, right? Janae, he's the one that wrote Invisible Residence. The underwater UFOs.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Yeah. And
I don't have that book. I just have your key.
I forgot your Mirror Universe. This book about underwater UFOs, where he proposes the ultra-terrestrial theory, the idea that these visitations, these UFOs, this phenomenon isn't so much an extraterrestrial thing, but that it's potentially an advanced civilization that evolved beyond humans for us. And we're just kind of here in their world. Jim, though, Ivan T. Sanderson should be significant for you because he was one of the first academic guys to really get involved in the Bigfoot thing. He kind of made it okay for more academic people to research Sasquatch and Yeti.
I'm old and I forget all these names. I
Mhm.
read all this stuff, but I forget the names. So I probably have read it, but being old sucks.
Yeah.
Well, I
So
suck at names if it makes you feel any better. Like I read stuff too, and I'm like, huh?
as far as the picture is concerned, though, he claims to have actually seen it and handled it, where the real one isn't. Nobody knows where it is now, and the Tombstone Epitaph apparently didn't actually publish it. Now, you're finding pictures of more modern things, or are those like internet pictures of
These are
the?
all pictures from a YouTube video. I'm just scrolling through the YouTube video and looking at various pictures.
Well, you were in terms of talking about like modern. The one I just posted in our chat, just so people could look at. I guess there's been an Alaskan Thunderbird sighting recently, in terms of like in January. I don't know how reliable the source is, but it's still interesting in terms of recording. There was what I thought was kind of cool, just kind of looking through, is just a lot of the instances or like sightings and modern day sightings that we have seem to be pre like turn of the century. And so cursory look for things. Most of the things I was finding was like a lot older. But I did come across this one thing in terms of seeing and it seems consistent with the Thunderbird sightings in terms of like large black bird.
Mm-hmm. Did you find the one about the Lawndale, Illinois?
Oh, the 77 one, but I guess I was like,
Because that's crazy. That's like broad daylight, giant bird comes down and just plucks this boy out of his group of
Yes, I did.
kids
Okay.
playing.
I
Yeah.
wasn't placing that. Yeah.
One of the birds clamped onto his shoulder with his claws and lifted this 10-year-old boy off about 2 feet off the ground, carried him about 30 yards, and people came out and chased it away before it dropped him.
That poor kid.
mm-hmm.
So, yeah, there's quite a bit of a dispute on it too, because I don't think, obviously, they didn't get any video or pictures of it, but again, they did describe it looking like a condor or a vulture.
And not like a bat, or I mean, not a bat, an owl or something. I could imagine if you owl with a huge ego.
Right.
Try that.
Yeah. Well, and that's the crazy thing about it, is usually these things are described to look more like a condor, but condors don't have grasping feet like talons, like an eagle or a hawk do, right? They have more walking, like a turkey, right?
Right.
So this is one of those things where if it's some kind of in between, some kind of different kind of creature.
But when they say looks like a condor, I mean, condors and turkey buzzards, turkey vultures, and all those things have those really ugly heads with no feathers.
Exactly. Right.
You don't want to be sticking your feathered head down into something's entrails. As opposed to say an eagle, that's feathered. So I mean, I wonder if people are making that distinction when they say it looks like a condor. Do they mean it has a bald head?
Right.
I'll say bald because that could be eaglish. That could connotate eagle. But this featherless head, or do they just mean like it's a really big bird with a huge wingspan?
I think the head is kind of that distinction. Like, a vulture, a buzzard kind of thing when you see it. And I guess, condors are kind of distinct.
Yeah.
Now, even in the Dene story, they described it as a cross between a condor and an eagle.
Which would be like a condor head with grasping feet.
Mm-hmm. So some zoologists have even weighed in on this idea. The idea So the idea that a bird, in order to be able to pick up a human being, even a child, would have to be really, really, really big. And we don't have any documented birds living today that we know of that are big enough to do that. Now, Dr. Mike Wallace of the Zoological Society of San Diego has come out saying that he's convinced that these animals are just turkey vultures, and that they're maybe not actually picking people up, but under the excitement that people get, the report itself gets inflated. It becomes a...
The kid had scars on him. Or
embellished, right?
I mean, he may be right to a point, but there was something there apparently that left scratches.
Mm-hmm. So that brings us to the idea of what could these be? What do you think? Any theories? Any thoughts? What's up?
Well, I think it's and I think the article that we have posted on our website, that we've kind of been drawing a lot of our inspiration from as we kind of go off on little sort of digs in the internet, is that like I think it's like an interesting thing to think about in terms of like just like one-off anomalies in terms of like giantism. I think that's like a really, really cool concept in term because we can, you know, different species and have that experience where you have maybe like really legitimate like condors or different sort of really big sort of accounts. I always kind of, especially when I'm looking like at a bird in the sky, just like from personal experience, which is why I have a tendency to kind of maybe a lot, without trying to discount like the other aspects of this phenomenon, is that like I'm like, oh my gosh, it was so huge, and then you look at it from a different perspective or get closer, or like that optical illusion, you're like, oh, it's way smaller than I was expecting, or
right.
I totally thought it was like, I thought it was a UFO and it turned out to be a bird. Like, some weird ways, like if you look at something in certain angles, there's like, wait, is that a dragon? So just kind of being mindful of the way like perception and depth and your orientation to an object really changes your experience of it.
You've got nothing for perspective, as you say, you have nothing to relate it to size, in the sky, and so it could be any size.
Dimensional species. I'm just kidding.
So the idea of a like a one-off, like a giant, right?
Yeah,
giantism.
One-off giant.
Is, there's lots of examples of giantism in humans. There's lots of examples of gigantism in other creatures. So that definitely alleviates the need for a full breeding population of a new species of creature, right? Then the idea of a relic species, right? Teratorns are one example of something that might be able to fit that bill. They weighed in around 60 to 80 kilograms, which would be 140 to 180 pounds. So that puts it big enough to be able to lift a person. We're looking at 23-foot wingspan for a teratorn.
Okay, so yeah, I believe in Bigfoots, which already certain points with certain mental deficiency or something there, but I can see a Bigfoot hiding in the wood. They're only 8 feet tall. If you have something that's got a wingspan of 15 to 20 plus feet, living someplace, and it's flying around, people are going to see that. These are not vast, unpopulated regions. And that's the thing I just have trouble getting my head around is, they would probably have to launch from some kind of a bluff or something. I mean, I'm just sort of guessing there, but, you have a creature that big floating around, over farm country, over wooded, rural areas, whatever. There's people, and people are going to see them regularly, unless they spend their whole life on the ground.
Well, yeah, but people spend a lot of time looking down on their phones. And
I'm sorry, what'd you say? I was looking at my phone. What'd you say?
So yeah, we could be having pterodons flying right over our head and not ever see them. It could be a flying saucer following you, and most people wouldn't even notice.
The triangular UFOs, that's what they are. Okay.
Sometimes I feel like that can be an oversimplification.
Right. There's the average person that's probably going to miss a lot, but there's enough people that are looking for that kind of thing.
Looking for that kind of thing.
Even if they're
so
UFO observers,
The fact, like, even as populated as we are, and as much technology as we have right now, there are still some areas of the world that are very remote and very untouched, right? Like the jungle, like there's dense forest area, there's, out at sea, there's a lot of stuff that we're still not as present. Have you ever been out in the desert, like down in like Four Corners area? There's big swaths of Colorado, Arizona, Utah, New Mexico that are pretty empty.
Yeah, huge territory down there.
Maybe we are dealing with giants, like a one-off giant condor or an eagle or something, or some kind of missing link hybrid that, is it a relic species? Is it a one-off giant? Or is it a spirit animal? Or is it all of the above?
It's everything.
Or did Mirror Universe Janae just bring it through with her? And this is just grounds for a Terran invasion.
Yep, exactly.
This is the first wave of a Terran invasion.
I'm secretly taking over everyone's minds. That's what's going on.
It's tricky. It was, you almost had us. I'm going to get you. But now we've figured out your plot, so back to the drawing board. And on that note, we're out of time, guys. This one flew by.
That was fun.
Pun intended?
Yeah, no, not at all. I didn't even realize I did that. So, yeah. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We really do hope you enjoyed it and put up with our banter and our foibles. But believe it or not, what you just heard was written and produced by the Crypto Science Society and all of our members who have collectively worked very hard to bring this project into reality. We also want to thank our newest members, Heather Spy Jane Metcalf and Apeda, for their contributions. Heather for her graphic design and video editing prowess, and Ace for the audio work on this and the last episodes, and hopefully many, many more to come. I would also like to welcome Mackenzie Allman to our group. Her and Heather are starting their own investigator training out there in Salt Lake City. Not quite a branch yet of the Crypto Science Society. And Ace is out there in Knoxville, Tennessee. So if anyone is in those areas, in the Knoxville area or Salt Lake City area, or Denver for that matter, and you want to get involved with us, please let us know and we will connect you appropriately. But again, we would not be here without you, fair listeners. Thank you so much again. We really appreciate all of your feedback and your subscriptions, right? Your listens. Everyone counts. So if you like this podcast and want to hear more, please subscribe, share, and let us know what you think in the comments. Find us on Castbox, Google Play, Stitcher, Podbean, Podcast Addict, and Radio Public. And you're also always welcome to email us at CryptoscienceSocietyX sciencecrypto@gmail.com. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, and visit the website at Science Crypto Journal at